Okay, thank you again for joining us today for this presentation. We have a full hour and a half packed with great information, which you will be able to use in your classroom or with your groups immediately. So let's get started. My name is Vera Cara Michelle, and I'm a school psychologist and behavior specialist here at WOCSIP.
My name is Ingrid Johnson Quesada, and I'm a school psychologist and behavior support liaison with WOCSIP.
Next slide. Okay. So as you read this, this is definitely one of my favorite quotes. It says, I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Some of you may have heard this quote before. I have seen portions of it, but again, this is definitely by far one of my favorite quotes. I have been in education for over 20 years in different capacities, and I have often heard from educators that they need to establish themselves as an authority with their students from day one, or to show the student who is in control. This quote captures the true extent of the power that you hold as an educator, and it is your choice how you will use that power that you have. And just like the quote states, you possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. So with that in mind, let's go over what we will cover today. So here are learning objectives for today. At the completion of this training, participants will be able to identify the 5 evidence-based practices of classroom management and their importance, learn also about procedures and routines to increase learning and participation, and also understand the importance of teaching with love and logic. We understand that this new school year brings about new challenges for all of us, not only as we try to prepare to respond to the needs of our students, but some of us may also be experiencing significant stress and uneasiness. This is a stress test, which we will all be taking now. So let's read this. It says on the next slide, look at both dolphins jumping out of the water. The dolphins are identical. A closely monitored scientific study revealed that despite the fact that the dolphins are identical, a person under stress would find differences in the 2 dolphins. The number of differences observed matches closely to the amount of stress the observer is experiencing. Look at the photograph, and if you find more than 1 or 2 differences, you may be experiencing stress. So let's get ready. Go ahead, Inger. Okay. So how many of you guys are identifying more than 1 difference in those? As I mentioned before, we are about to begin a new school year after all of the challenges that we faced during 2020. And we have been preparing for our students to return in person full time. Some of you may be excited to be back in person, while others may be experiencing some level of stress right now. We are hoping to alleviate some of the stress that you may be feeling by giving you information to help you feel even more prepared to welcome students back. Some of the topics that we will be discussing today will be well known for some of you, and this will simply be a refresher, but you may gain some new, perhaps aha moments as we go along. Our goal for today's presentation is for you to hopefully learn something new and to know that there is one person who will make a difference in your classroom success this year, and that person is you. Clearly, this was meant to make you laugh and think about the fact that we are all coming back to this school year a bit more stressed. Some of you because you're beginning a new job, some of us because we know, excuse me, what is coming ahead of us. Go ahead, Inger. Okay. According to the research, a study reviewing student learning looked at 11,000 pieces of research that spanned over 50 years and determined and ranked 28 factors that influence student learning. The results indicated that the most important factor, though, in all of those was classroom management. So you can see how important and crucial it is for us to have this under our belt. Some of you may be familiar also, Inger, can you, yeah, thank you. Some of you may be familiar with Harry Wong, but if you're not, look him up. He has over 35 years experience in the classroom teaching. He lectures to educators, administrators around the world, and his students have won more than 200 awards for academic excellence. Harry Wong and his wife authored The First Days of School, which is a guidebook written to help teachers everywhere be as efficient and effective as they can, regardless of their teaching style or level of experience. The book emphasizes the principles of successful classroom management, as every student and teacher will be more successful in a well-managed classroom. So you can see here, one of the quotes here from him: students want a safe, predictable, and nurturing environment, one that is consistent. Students like well-managed classes because no one yells at them and learning takes place. Effective teachers spend the first 2 weeks teaching students to be in control of their own actions in a consistent classroom environment. That's the idea. Unfortunately, very few of us may have 2 weeks to actually teach this, but it is definitely important to take some time at the very beginning of the year to stress this and teach this to our students in order for learning to take place, but also for the year to go smoothly. Next slide. So let's think about this for a second. What comes to mind for you when you hear the phrase classroom management? I want you to think about that. Whatever comes to mind first, I want you to put it in the chat. Inger, let me know when you see
Structure,
okay,
more
thank you.
learning, behavior and organization,
Okay,
supports in place,
okay,
boundaries.
perfect. Excellent. Okay, next slide. So classroom management is definitely everything that you mentioned right now, as well as everything that the teacher does to organize students in terms of the space, how they're going to be utilizing the space, in terms of the time, how am I going to use the time to teach my kids, and also what materials am I going to use so that instruction and content and student learning can take place. So the reality is that it's all of those things, but it's so much that takes place when we talk about classroom management. In general, this is your plan. This is the plan of attack that you have as a teacher when you come into the classroom. So consider this: if pilots have flight plans, coaches have game plans, then effective teachers must have a classroom management action plan. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you just a quick second to read that. So do you have a classroom management action plan? Even if you're a school psychologist, if you're a speech pathologist, when we bring our students into a group or work for them individually, we must still have a plan. It's not just for a classroom itself, but we all should have a plan in place. And I sure hope that this is not your classroom or group management plan that you have in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so the two most important variables for learning here: effective learning management paves the way to increased learning. So if we want our kids to learn, we must be able to manage their behavior well in the classroom. Effective behavior management includes strategies to promote positive classroom behaviors and prevent problems before they occur, while responding to misbehavior in a calm and consistent manner, which allows for greater time devoted to instruction and greater academic engagement time. These again are the two most important variables for learning. Time devoted to instruction, that means how much time throughout your day is actually devoted to direct instruction, small group activities, and independent seat work. The second important variable here for learning is the academic engagement time, or the extent to which students are engaged or paying attention to your instruction. Learning does not occur if students are not paying attention. Okay, next slide, please. So this is what a well-managed classroom looks like. A well-managed classroom has students who are involved during instruction and are working. Expectations are clear. Objectives of the lessons are delineated and communicated to the students, as well as specific detail on what they will be learning and what they will be tested on. A well-managed classroom has little to no downtime, confusion, or disruptions because the students know what the assignment is and what the expectation is. The teacher posts assignments and also uses positive reinforcement strategies in the classroom to encourage positive and expected behaviors. A well-managed classroom is productive and work-oriented as the teacher practices procedures until they become routines and knows how to bring the class again to be attentive and pay attention to you. So again, if we look at these 4 areas, a well-managed classroom has high level of student involvement, has clear student expectations and little wasted time, little disruption and little confusion, and is work-oriented. Next slide, please. So when you think about classroom management, what is your favorite classroom management strategy that you've used or that you use currently? I want you to think about that for a second, and I want you to tell me about that. Which are some classroom management strategies that you've used and you like? Put that in the chat for me.
So Pauline says, I like using positive reinforcement.
Okay.
Kristen, positive reinforcement works so well. Berenice, token system and positive reinforcement. Stephanie, I agree with Pauline, positive reinforcement and praise, visual supports.
Okay, perfect. So I heard a lot about positive reinforcement, which is definitely important, and then also the visual supports. But as we're going to learn today, there's so much more to classroom management than just the positive reinforcement and the visual supports. It is definitely important to keep those in mind as we go along, and I think that you continue to use those as you see fit with the students, and you will see in the order that we discussed those today where positive reinforcement and even visual supports will come in. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first day of school. When any of us goes to a new place for the first time, we experience some hesitation, perhaps combined with a little excitement, but for sure we may have some questions. How do I get there? Where do I go in? What will I wear? And so on. Your students have questions too. So for the first day, what students may want to know perhaps may be, am I in the right room? Where am I supposed to sit? How will my teacher be with me? Will he or she like me? Will I like him or her? And what are the expectations in the classroom? Perhaps not in those words, but all kids may have some of those questions as well. So make sure that these are questions that you answer for them as they come into your group or to your classroom, and greet them on their first day. We will be discussing more about greeting at the door and the importance of developing positive relationships with your students later on in this presentation. Go ahead, Inger. So set the tone for a successful year. First thing is, don't forget that smile. So simple, right? Yet sometimes we forget. I have to interject a quick little story here. I was a teacher before I became a school psychologist and a behavior specialist. And I remember, this was many moons ago, but I remember one of the teachers that was working with me that said to me, the first week or so, you do not let kids know that you are a softie. You do not smile. You start setting rules from point one and you teach them who the boss is. And so the more that I've learned after 20 years of this experience that I've had, I realized that the smile can take you so far, not only with students, but with individuals that we encounter, even our own co-workers that we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. So please don't forget that smile. The next thing is stand at the door and greet your students, making sure that they are in the right place. It's so simple. Kids may be anxious just to check in. Hi, good morning, I'm Mrs. So-and-so. You're here for this. Are you in the right place? Or whatever the case may be. Also direct your students where to sit. Have your assignment written on the board and have them get started on it right away. This is going to be really important because first impressions count. Show your skill as an efficient classroom manager and teacher. And now I'm going to pass it on to Inger so that she could talk a little bit more in terms of the steps to take and all the different areas that are included in classroom management. Go ahead, Inger.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Sorry if I had a little technical difficulty.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, so as you all know, there are a number of additional proactive classroom management strategies, including both relationship strategies that Vera touched on a little bit and procedural strategies that are effective. There's so many things out there, but we want to narrow our focus right now to the 5 evidence-based practices of classroom management. The first evidence-based practice is identifying and teaching expectations. The second is ensuring structure and routines. The third is to actively engage your students. The fourth is strategies to acknowledge behavior. And the fifth is strategies to manage misbehavior. So as we go along, we're going to be expanding on each of these 5 evidence-based practices. And each of these strategies have been independently validated as preventing problem behavior. And they also contribute to an increased time dedicated to instruction, which is very important, and greater academic engagement time for our students. Okay, so here we are at evidence-based practice number 1. We're going to talk about identifying and teaching expectations. So on the first day of school, we're quickly coming up on that day. The most important student behaviors that have to be taught, as you all well know, are classroom expectations, right? Followed by procedures and routines, as these go hand in hand with each other. Our procedures do allow us to create those predictable and consistent environments. And when you teach procedures, you're also teaching your expectations until it becomes a habit or routine for the students. The foundation of classroom management is a set of expectations that describes those desired behaviors across routines, settings, tasks, etc. within the classroom. Our students have to be clear on what expected behaviors are, and classroom expectations also shape the values and the climate of your classroom. So I'm sure each of you work really hard to develop those positive relationships with your students and create those positive classroom climates where students feel important, supported, respected, and valued. This is so important because when there is that emphasis placed on student-teacher relationships, you're gonna see increased academic engagement and better academic outcomes overall for students. So just keep in mind as we move along, we're going to be talking about relationships a little bit more later, but those positive relationships are critical. They build motivation for students. They create safe spaces for learning and improve student behavior overall. So let's now focus on best practices in establishing and teaching expectations. So best practice in establishing and teaching expectations is to establish, teach, model, post, cue, and reinforce behavioral expectations. So first, we want to establish what those expectations actually are. They should be developed on the first day of school. Students should be involved in the process of setting those expectations because you want their buy-in, right? The data shows that students are more likely to follow those rules if they were involved in the whole process of creating them. We also want to establish 3 to 5 teachable behavioral expectations that are positively worded. So we want to tell them what they should be doing, not what they shouldn't be doing. We don't want any negative statements in our rules. Expectations should be really simple and clear. They should be developmentally appropriate for your students. And those expectations should also be observable and measurable. And usually they're the extension of the school-wide expectations, right? So now we look at teaching and modeling the expectations on an ongoing basis throughout the school year. It doesn't stop after the first 2 weeks. It's ongoing throughout the school year. This is where you think about how you're going to teach, reteach, remind your students of their expectations, and there should be a systematic schedule for teaching them. You also want to make sure that you post the expectations that your class developed together in a visible location where all the students can see them and they can easily be referred to them and revisited as often as needed. And then cue your students visually. You want to prompt those expected behaviors. But finally, and most importantly, reinforce your students when they demonstrate those expected behaviors in the classroom. Okay, so this brings us to our first activity. So what are 3 to 5 expectations that you like to have in your classrooms or in your counseling sessions or speech groups? So think about those expectations, and I want you to please type your answers in the chat.
We expect that this may take a few minutes, so we will be patient and wait for your answers in the chat. Since we are recording, Inger, I feel like you and I need to have a slideshow right now.
I know. I know.
Okay, they've started to come in now. So 1 is turn taking, respectful of others. 2 is on time and ready to work. 3 is supportive of peers. Also being open-minded, respectful, and supportive. The next one is try your best, even if the task is difficult. 2 is listen to all instructions. 3 is communicate your needs. We have someone else saying be respectful, listen when someone else is speaking, try your best. Another one is being respectful to others, asking questions, judgment-free zone. Oh, I like that one, judgment-free zone. I guess we would have to teach what that means, and I'm sure you'll talk about that. Next one says, be respectful of others' property, personal space, and opinion of others. I think we have some good examples so far.
Yeah, those are excellent examples. Thank you, all of you, for participating in that. I know it's hard to think of those right on the fly. We're asking a lot of you right away, but we want to get you thinking. And again, I think the most important part, the key component when you develop those expectations is that you develop them in collaboration with your students so that they're a part of that process and they have that buy-in, because they're going to be more apt to following those expectations when they're included in development of them. So here is just a sample of classroom expectations. So remembering our best practice guidelines that I reviewed a little bit earlier, this is a pretty good example of just simple and clear expectations. There's no more than 3 to 5. There's 5 on this one. They're positively worded and stated. They're observable and measurable. But when we get to being respectful, right? And then what somebody shared, like judgment-free zone, those are kind of those expectations that we're going to have to really teach what that means, what it is that we're looking for, right? Because some of our expectations, having your required materials ready for the day, that's easy to observe and measure, you know, they've got it. Or stay seated, listening when speaking, you know, those are easier to teach. They're observable and measurable. But when we have those ones where we're talking about being respectful, you know, we're in a non-judgmental zone, those we're going to spend more time teaching. Does that make sense? So when we think about steps for teaching, procedures and expectations, we have to keep in mind that they should be taught systematically. There should be a clear lesson plan developed, just like you would teach any other lesson. You want a lesson plan to teach your classroom expectations. As you all know, and are experts, I'm sure at this already, when you explicitly teach those behavioral expectations and routines, it's going to increase structure and predictability in the classroom, which leads to what? Less chaos, right? Fewer problems for us, so a better managed classroom. The steps for teaching those procedures and expectations, first, we want to explain. So we're going to state, explain, model, and demonstrate the procedure. Next, you want to rehearse and practice the procedure with your students under your supervision. You have to do this. You have to find as many opportunities to rehearse and practice for them so that they understand what the expectation is and what's expected of them. And then finally, you want to reinforce the procedure and expectation that has been taught until it becomes a part of their routine, a regular habit. Find as many opportunities to give praise when students engage in those expected behaviors and follow those routines. So initially at the beginning of the school year, you're going to be doing a lot of this. You're going to be spending a lot of time teaching, modeling those expectations, rehearsing and reviewing them, and giving a lot of feedback, often positive feedback. Students should actively participate when you're teaching those expectations. So for example, you explain why the rule is important. You demonstrate the rule. You can give examples and non-examples if you choose to, and you can have students rehearse what the rule is. So make sure you actively teach those rules regularly during the first 2 to 3 weeks of school, provide those regular reminders about expected behaviors, and then find opportunities as teachable moments for expectations throughout the day. Don't assume that students are going to learn and remember the rules if you just tell them. They need active and repeated practice. This is so important. So plan to review those expectations at least on a weekly basis throughout the school year. Reteach those rules as needed after breaks, when new students enter the classroom, and then when you notice behavior problems seeming to increase. Also, frequently find those opportunities to reinforce students for demonstrating expected behaviors. So if you see certain expectations are broken more frequently than others, then these expectations should be practiced and reinforced more often, right? If your students are having difficulty with a particular expectation, you might choose to focus on that expectation for the day and give specific praise and rewards to any student you see following the expectation of the day, or if students catch their peers following the expectation of the day. Okay, so here we have an example using those 3 steps to teach, explain, rehearse, and reinforce how to quiet a classroom. So first, we're going to explain that you're going to tap a bell and students are to freeze, turn and face the teacher, and be ready for instruction. You're going to model and show what this would look like in your classroom. Next, you're going to rehearse that procedure by having the students visit quietly with each other for a few minutes. Then you're going to tap a bell. And then you're going to observe and see, did the students freeze? Did they turn and face the teacher when the bell rang? Did they look ready for instruction? And then you're going to reinforce that procedure by correcting any mistakes, giving praise for following the procedure, and then rehearse this again and again and again and again. Make sure that you're rehearsing this and practicing this often, so then it becomes a habit and part of the routine. Okay. This moves us to our second evidence-based practice, which is ensuring structure and routines. So thinking about structure and routines, our classroom structure gives attention to the actual physical layout of a classroom, the organization of materials in the classroom, and the extent to which classroom expectations and routines are explicitly defined and taught. When we have well-structured classrooms and create a space that's predictable and facilitates desired behaviors, our classroom structure is so important to us, because if we have that structure, it increases efficiency for what we need to do and what we need to get done for the day, and leaves a lot more time for instruction. But it also promotes a lot of positive academic and social behaviors for students, including increasing their own attention, friendlier interactions amongst peers, and less disruptive behavior and aggression. So when we think about our structure and routines, we want to think about our physical space and our structure and routines. So this table includes areas to consider when you are arranging your classroom environment. So some areas you might want to consider include, sorry about that, are high traffic areas free of congestion? Can all students be easily seen by the teacher and vice versa? Are frequently used materials easily accessible? Can all students see whole class presentations easily? Do students have ample room around their desks and seats? Are the desks organized in a way that facilitates teaching? During small group instruction, can the teacher still see all of the students? Does the layout also accommodate students with special needs? And is there space available for students who need a quieter work environment or time to wind down? Okay, so I want you to keep all of these considerations of physical space in the classroom in mind as we move into our next activity. So on the next slide, you're going to be looking at a physical space and layout of a sample classroom. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and see if you can identify any areas of concern with this sample classroom layout. And if you identify any areas of concern, I want you to type it in the chat. Okay. So looking at this layout, this physical space and layout in the classroom, what are some areas of concern that you see? I want you to please put your answers in the chat. Are we seeing any?
I was muted. Sorry about that. Yes, we're starting to see some answers come in. So the first thing here is the kidney desk is blocking the board. You see that?
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Okay. Not all students can access or see the board. Another good one.
Yeah.
Computers are really close to the water. Very good observation. Some students can't easily see the teacher. Okay, the U-shaped table has students' backs to the board. High traffic areas are not free of congestion. And teacher may not be able to see the class since the kidney desk is faced the other way. Wow.
Wow, you guys,
They did pretty good.
I think, yeah, I think you guys checked every box. Okay, so let's take a look and see how we did. I think you guys got everything. The only other thing, so if we notice that little space, it looks like a library space on the left. So this area there's a problem with that area because it's difficult to supervise any students that are right here. Because the bookshelf blocks, the teacher's view from this area. So that was another area. You guys got the common areas where the computer, water fountain, they're too close to student desks and hard to access without disrupting others. Again, you guys got that some students have their back to the board, so that's not a good thing. And then the other thing, this small single desk is in the middle of a high traffic area. So yeah, other things, when you think about your classroom and organizing your classroom, the most important thing is you want to make sure that all the students can see the instruction, right? They shouldn't have to strain or engage in any effort to see what's going on, to see, the teacher teaching. Making sure that any visual or auditory distractions are limited as much as possible. If you have any problem students in your classroom, don't seat them next to each other. We want to make sure that there's separation there. And then there should be a good flow in and out and around the room with minimal disruptions, right? So no computers next to the sink, things like that. And then just considering if you're doing whole group, small group, individual instruction, you want the most optimal seating arrangements, right? And again, when you think about physical space and layout, when you have a good layout of your classroom, it's going to help you reduce any kind of disruptive behavior, disruptions in the classroom, and just allows to increase the overall academic productivity of the students. Okay, so that brings us to just structure and expectations that must become routines in our classrooms. So how do we begin our class? How do we get our students' attention? How do we quiet a class? How does a student seek help? What does that look like? What are they supposed to do? What do our transitions look like? What are those structure and expectations look like? Movement of students in the classroom, papers, and then what does the end of class routine look like? So these are all structure and expectations that have to become routines and that we have to consider. So here's an example of a teacher's bathroom pass procedure and routine. Again, the goal is for the students to be able to go to the bathroom and get those needs met without disrupting the class. So keeping in mind our steps for teaching procedures and expectations, right? We want to explain, rehearse, and reinforce. So we explain the bathroom pass procedure by stating it, explaining it, modeling it, and demonstrating it, right? So in this particular procedure, when the pass is available, the student's supposed to raise their hand, wait to be called on. Then the next step is ask respectfully to use the restroom. Then the next step is they write their name and time on a sign out sheet. Now this isn't a routine. This is for this particular teacher. This is the routine that works for her classroom. Everybody's going to have different routines and different expectations. But again, this is the process that we're teaching for this particular routine in this particular class. For the fourth step, they take their pass, they return within 5 minutes, and then they write the time they returned and return the pass. So once you've explained this bathroom pass procedure, you've modeled it, you've demonstrated it, then you're going to rehearse it and you're going to practice the bathroom procedure, reteaching as much as needed. And then finally, we always want to reinforce this procedure until it becomes a habit or routine, and give praise during this teaching process when students follow the procedure and routine or attempts to follow the procedure or routine. So this ties into what we have been talking about when it comes to teaching expectations and routines. and how and why we need to be systematic with instruction and repetition, because we just have to. We have to practice, 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 and reteach as often as needed. Keep in mind that for a child to unlearn an old behavior and replace it with the new behavior must be repeated on average 28 times. So that's a lot. That's a lot. So that's good for us to keep in mind. And this is why we need to practice, practice, revisit, revisit. Okay, this brings us to our third evidence-based practice, which is actively engaging our students. So the benefits of active engagement includes just overall improvements in achievement. There's a direct link between how instruction is delivered in a classroom and the behavior of students. So those developmentally appropriate academic opportunities, so those that are not too easy or not too difficult, provide students mastery experiences that increase their academic success. And if they have more engagement in academic instruction, they're going to have higher levels of achievement. There's also other benefits of actively engaging students, such as greater empathy after 2 months of use, greater attitude towards school or peers, and increased liking towards peers, increases in self-esteem, and less competitiveness. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some or all of these strategies to encourage many opportunities for students to respond in the classroom. But here's a quick review for you. So the first one is choral responding, and this gives students more opportunities to participate and receive feedback during instruction. A cueing method is usually developed by the teacher to trigger choral responding. So for example, begin by keeping your hand raised, and when you lower your hand as the teacher, this cues the students to provide a response. Another way to create opportunities for students to respond and interact is by randomly selecting students to provide answers. Many students learn that if they don't raise their hand in the classroom, they're not going to be called upon. But when you use random solicitation of responses, students never know when it's going to be their turn to provide an answer. Another strategy is think, turn, talk, or pair share. And that involves a peer mediated cooperative learning. So when you use think, turn, talk, it provides students with an opportunity to interact with one another around the topic. And this has been shown to be really effective when taught and modeled for students. And our last strategy to encourage many opportunities for students to respond is the jigsaw method. So this is a cooperative learning technique where students are organized to be dependent on each other for success. So in this method, you divide students into jigsaw groups. Each member is given a specific segment of a topic. Next, the students form temporary expert groups with others assigned the same segment of the topic. In those expert groups, they learn their segment, and then they return back to their jigsaw group and they teach that segment to the group. So there are so many different and effective strategies you can use in the classroom to encourage students to respond and keep them actively engaged. So my question for you is, what strategies do you use in the classroom to encourage your students to respond? Please put your answers in the chat.
I will let you know as soon as I see stuff coming in. Okay, so first answer here is sharing with a classmate.
Yep, absolutely.
Visual. I use individual whiteboards and have the students write or draw their responses.
That's
really
excellent.
Good.
Yes.
Mhm. Thumbs up or down.
Yep.
Ask for volunteers first and then call on individuals for input.
Absolutely. Okay, so those are all good examples. Again, you could be really creative with how you engage students and give them opportunities to respond. So we have included a link on this slide for a classroom management checklist that Vera actually helped refine into the key components of classroom management. So this resource is also available with many other resources you might find helpful if you're interested, and that's on the PENT, the Positive Environment Network of Trainers website. This checklist can help you identify which essential classroom management techniques are in place in your classroom, and then this information can be used to identify areas of growth and specific strategies you want to implement to support an area. And it also allows you to identify techniques that are well established in your classroom, as well as areas that may be underdeveloped and that need improvement and can call your attention to those areas. So if I click on the link, you'll see it pops up a picture of this checklist that we just talked about. Can everybody see that?
I can't see it yet, Inger. I'm not sure if anyone else can.
Okay.
No, there's nodding no.
Okay. So that's good for me to know. I think it'll close out the presentation if I try to share that. So
Okay.
the links are working and they're in there for you. But this is where you would click to access this document for the classroom management checklist.
Can I add a quick little something, Inger, to that? So that once you're able to, because the link is active, so you should be able to go directly into it. We tested that out. One of the nice things that you can do with this is that it is actually a pretty extensive list. So if you go through it, it gives you almost ideas that sometimes you had not thought about in terms of, do I have it in place or do I not? So it may be things that you already do, but it may also provide some additional ideas or strategies that you could perhaps look into to expand some more. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this brings us into our fourth evidence-based practice, which are strategies to reinforce behavior. So our strategies to reinforce behavior, we're looking at 3 different areas when we look at class-wide. We're looking at reinforcement in the form of behavior-specific praise and positive comments, token economies, and group contingencies. You want to create, and keep in mind, you want to create that comprehensive reinforcement system in your classroom to strengthen those desired and expected behaviors. So catching your students being good is going to be one of the most powerful motivators there is. And research has shown that this is much more effective in changing a child's behavior while also helping them be more confident and have better self-esteem. Because when they feel good about their behavior, this motivates them to do it more and to get better at it. So let's move to the next slide. We're going to talk about how to use behavior-specific praise in those positive comments. It can be as simple as a friendly smile, gestures such as high five, thumbs up, fist bumps, but any positive comment that you give a student should be in the form of behavior-specific praise. So for example, good job waiting your turn versus just good job. Tell them exactly what they did a good job doing. And you want to deliver it as soon as the student engages in the positive behavior, because giving students that positive feedback is going to reinforce those expected behaviors. Praise, acknowledgement, feedback, they're all used to let students know they're performing a skill correctly, and it's one of the most important strategies. So remember to reinforce not just the exact skill and behavior, but also approximations of that skill and behavior so you can shape the behavior. Another important thing to keep in mind is the ratio of 5 positive comments for every 1 correction given. That's best practice. If we're giving too much negative feedback, correction, criticism, it creates conflict in the classroom. It can lead to those feelings of resentment, anger, feelings of failure. Correction can be most effective when the emphasis is in the classroom, is on delivery of that positive feedback. Another strategy to reinforce behavior are token economies. And this is where individual students' positive behavior can be reinforced with the use of tokens, and the individual student receives their own rewards. So tokens can be represented by many different things, such as points, stickers, stamps, tickets, punch cards. And those tokens are saved and can be exchanged for a future reward. The economy are the different values, so the number of tokens that are placed on those rewards. So when using a token economy with a student, you want to make sure you start every school day by reviewing the behavior expectations and the rewards. And this discussion should include explicit instruction on the target and goal behaviors, the reinforcer and the reward that the student is working toward that day, and making sure to pair that token delivery with behavior specific praise, telling the student exactly what he or she did that gave him or her access to the token. Reinforcement-based systems should aim at catching children being good. So this doesn't mean that challenging behavior should be ignored entirely. It's important for teachers to keep their students safe, which might mean blocking a child from throwing a toy or intervening when students are being aggressive toward one another. However, if the student enjoys getting attention from you, which is the function of the behavior, and that's a whole other training, but the challenging behaviors may persist in order to access your attention if you respond by reprimanding him or engaging him in those one-to-one discussions. But when you give your attention for appropriate behaviors, the student's more likely to engage in those appropriate behaviors to access your attention. With token economies, make sure you reserve those reinforcers or privileges that students can trade in their tokens for only when they have earned a sufficient number of tokens. So just as you might be less likely to go to work every day for your paycheck if you had a money tree in your backyard, our students are less likely to work toward reinforcers and privileges if they are available freely in the classroom. So if your reinforcers are tangible or edible items, toys, candy, make sure that those items are only available in exchange for tokens. Likewise, if your reinforcer is a special activity, such as extra recess time, only allow children to engage in that activity when they've reached their token goal. So I know that was in a nutshell. There's a lot more to this, but we just are doing a quick overview of what this looks like. So here are some examples of token economies in the classroom. So if you look on the left, this one is talking about punch cards. So when you earn 12 punches, you get a reward, and there's a menu there for what the rewards are. If you look on the right example, and these are commonly used in our SEC classrooms, every student has a token economy. They're each working on their own individual behaviors, and they each have the same goal. So once they get all of their tokens and fill it up, then they earn access to a reward. So here's some more examples. A lot of teachers do use those dojo points. So when they earn a certain number of dojo points, there's a menu on the right of what they're earning, what they can trade in those points for. And then on the left, oops. On the left, this teacher is using a token economy. She's using a point system. So a certain number of points is going to earn the students access to some sort of reward or reinforcer. And each student has their own card for their points. So another easy way to reinforce expected behaviors in the classroom is the ticket system. So this can be used across elementary, middle school, high school classrooms. You just need a roll of tickets. You can figure out a method of how to track those tickets. So you can put a stamp on those before handing them out, or sign your initials. So then they know, you know that those are the tickets that you handed out for expected behaviors. You can create a ticket cash-in reward chart. So you can see that on the right. Students are going to want to know what they're working for. And so you're going to have a list of rewards of a certain number of tickets and what that earns the student. So for example, extra recess time, snacks, bonus points on tests, homework passes. There's a number of ideas for reinforcement. And then the next thing you want to do in your classroom is just begin issuing those tickets. So once you've set up your ticket system, you're going to give tickets for everything, good behavior, following those expectations in the classroom. And finally, the last thing that you want to do is create a designated ticket cash-in day. So this is important. The program is only going to be effective if it's efficient. So you need to decide how frequently you're going to allow students to cash in those tickets. Is it going to be once a week, once every 2 weeks, etc. And then the day before the ticket cash-in day, make sure that all of those items that they can trade in their tickets for are available for purchase and on display, so students can see what they can buy with their tickets.
Can I add a little something to that, Inger?
Yeah.
When you're using a system this way in terms of the tickets, it is also important that once you're establishing it at the very beginning, that you are reinforcing frequently so that the tickets not only become reinforcing for the kids, but that they would want to get more and more of those, right? So that they get to taste what it is to cash those in, that you don't make it so difficult so that, you know, weeks go by before they can actually cash in because they're going to lose interest. But at the same time, I can tell you first experience that there are so many times once you have established your system and the kids know every time she picks up that roll of tickets, there's a potential for her to give me one. All I had to do literally is I would grab my roll of tickets as I was walking around my classroom, the kids would see me, they would automatically begin exhibiting the appropriate behavior for me. And in many cases, I would just put down my roll of tickets and just give them, you know, positive praise and then bring it out again. So at some point, you don't want to use those tickets all the time and every time because your kiddos are going to satiate. But you want to then move your reinforcement schedule to intermittent. So sometimes I give it to you, sometimes I don't. I'm checking. Sometimes you may get it, sometimes you may not. That's it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, you can also consider group contingencies, right? So those work well for most classrooms. The reinforcers don't have to be big items or last a long time. They're also meaningful to kids and reinforce expected behaviors. You can learn about what the students are willing to work for by observing your students, asking students what they want to work for. You can do preference assessments. But when you're looking at group contingencies, the students are working for one reinforcer as a group. So it's a good opportunity to practice that collaborative decision-making with the group. So you can vote on what that reinforcer is going to be, just to find out what's going to be motivating for the whole class to work for. Typical ideas are extra time at recess, mini field trips on campus, the library, an older student's classroom, pizza party, special class game, watching a movie, pajama day the next school day. There's so many ideas that you can use. But once your class has decided on a reinforcer, then you want to make sure that you have a visual. So a visual that's going to remind the students of what they're working toward. Remember, those reinforcers that they're working for are only available when the class meets their goal. And make sure that whatever the reward is tailored to the interests of the kids. So here are some examples. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can use these in the classroom. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the mystery motivator and the marble jar. If you click on either of these links, if you're interested in the steps for implementation of either of these strategies, a nice little handout will pop up for you. It's not going to pop up for me right now because it's not letting me, but the links are active and they're working. And so I'm not sure if any of you can see that. Can you see that, Vera? That just popped up. Okay. So the links are here. You just need to click on the heading and it'll give you specific instructions of how to implement that group contingency in the classroom. Another group contingency is beat the teacher classroom game. And students are usually competitive. So if you have a highly competitive group, this game will be effective. So what you want to do is create 3 areas of focus for your classroom. So if I want my students to come into class each day and begin working quietly on their seat work, this is one of my areas of focus. You want to communicate with your students the expectations for receiving their points. This is also really important. They need to know exactly what is expected of them. And then you want to make sure that you have an area in your classroom where you post those point trackers. So points that the students are earning and points that the teacher is earning. And explain how the students earn points. So for example, students earn a point if everyone is working on their seat work, but when the bell rings, the teacher earns a point if everyone is not working on their seat work when the bell rings. Another idea is students will earn a point if 100% of the class turns in their homework, but the teacher earns a point if the class does not turn in their homework. Another idea is students earn a point if no trash is left behind after the class leaves for recess, but the teacher earns a point if trash is left behind. So you can decide what those areas of focus are going to be in order for students to earn points and teachers to earn points, and then really spell out and have a chart indicating how do students earn points and how do teachers earn points. And then you just start playing. The key is to keep the points close so that the class doesn't give up, right? You don't want the teacher to just keep earning points and then the students not earning points. Then it's kind of be like, well, what's the point? You want to make sure that you manage it and run that game. And you can run the game for, up to 4 weeks, rewarding the class at the end of the month if they beat the teacher. But again, when we talk about if you already have had a classroom management system in place, 4 weeks might be a good amount of time. But if this is something new, they might need to earn that reinforcer much quicker. So you might want to earn it at the end of the week or at the end of the day. It's up to you how often you want to reinforce and what that schedule looks like, depending on the needs of your class. Okay, so here's another group contingency called the good behavior game. I'm sure many of you have heard of this particular game. The goal of it and using it in the class is just to reduce inappropriate disruptive behaviors and to increase overall on-task behaviors. It's been used across the elementary and middle school grades, and it allows you not to rely on those frequent tangible reinforcers like treats and toys and things like that. This particular game, it's an approach to managing classrooms and behaviors, and it rewards students for displaying appropriate on-task behaviors during instructional times. So the way it works is you divide your class into 2 teams. A point is given to a team for any inappropriate behavior displayed by one of its members. The team with the fewest number of points at the game's conclusion each day wins a group reward. If both teams keep their points below a preset level determined by the teacher, then both teams can share in the reward. For the sake of time, if you click on the title again, the good behavior game, we've included a link if you're interested in the steps for implementation of this particular strategy. And the last strategy is the hero procedure reward system. This particular reward is one student's behavior is going to equal a group reward. You want to be really careful about this one. A good strategy to use if you want to use this particular strategy to target a few students is you can use an old can, wrap it in construction paper, title it Be the Hero. You're going to need a package of popsicle sticks. You're going to write each student's name written on it, put those sticks in the can. In the morning, the teacher is going to review a target behavior for the day and remind students of what they're working toward. You can select one target behavior to observe during one activity. So we're talking about one behavior expectation during recess, for example. So maybe the kids are having trouble keeping their hands to themselves. Or the target behavior might be staying with the group during a transition from class to the playground. The teacher will then draw randomly 3 popsicle sticks, but you're not going to reveal the students' names to anybody. The teacher is going to keep those to herself. She's going to draw those sticks, And during the target activity, if the teacher sees a popsicle kid engaging in the target behavior, the teacher will wait until the end of the activity and then will announce to the class that the student had earned the reward for the class by engaging in the target behavior. So you're going to praise that particular student on the stick. They earned that reward for the whole class. If your popsicle kids, the ones that you chose, did not engage in those target behaviors, the teacher is going to let the class know at the end of the activity that they did not earn the reinforcer. And the teacher does not reveal the name of the popsicle kid. That's what we're calling it, to anyone. So in this way, the teacher is allowed to reinforce target behaviors without shaming or punishing students. So this is a group contingency that you can also consider for use in your classroom. Okay, this brings us to our last evidence-based practices, which is strategies to manage misbehavior. The 3 keys for managing misbehavior to keep in mind are: you just want to use a range of positive behavior strategies and supports. Use reinforcement strategies first prior to considering punishment, with an emphasis on reteaching and reinforcing desired behaviors prior to punishing misbehavior. So this is where we think about all those strategies that a lot of teachers are already using, such as morning routines, morning meetings, adding brain breaks, role modeling and practicing expected behaviors, using that behavior-specific praise to support behaviors, and end-of-day meetings to bring the group together, having each student share their high point about the school day. This allows kids to leave school on a high note, and it also allows you to learn more about the students. With misbehavior, the bottom line is we want to really focus on using those 5 evidence-based practices for comprehensive and effective classroom management. Remember that misbehavior is an opportunity for reteaching, and your most 2 effective tools are behavior-specific praise and opportunities for high rates of responding in the classroom. So now that we have discussed and reviewed the 5 evidence-based practices, I will be handing it over to Vera, and she'll be talking with us about the Love and Logic teaching approach to behavior management.
Okay, thank you. At the beginning of the presentation, I told you guys that we had a packed 1.5 hours for you, and packed it will be. So I'm going to try to go through the rest of the information in the last 15 minutes or so that we have together. One of the areas that I absolutely love, I think for those of you guys that know me, and I have worked with you guys, either with some of your students in the past or just have attended some of the trainings or presentations we've done, is that I am a behavior specialist here. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst, but I'm also a school psychologist. And for those of you guys that are school psychologists, once a school psychologist, always a school psychologist. And so when it comes to being a behaviorist, you know, for us in that world of behavior, unless you can measure something that's taking place, really, it's not really measurable for us. So there's not much we can do about that, you know. But the reality is that I call myself a behaviorist feeler, because I think that feelings, even though we may not be able to measure some of them by watching them or observing certain behaviors, we know they exist and we know that they are very, very important. And so I find this idea of teaching with love and logic so super important for us to understand and be able to use with our students. So this is a programming concept developed by Jim Fay, Foster Klein, and Charles Fay. How many of you have heard of it? Give me a thumbs up if you've heard of it. Okay, I'm not seeing any thumbs up. Oh, I see one. Janet, thank you. Okay, perfect. So I absolutely love this. So Love and Logic does not replace your present classroom management. This is really an addition to it. So instead, this is going to guide you. And also it's sort of an approach as to how you can run your class or your group, and also how you can respond to situations that you face in the classroom. This is really a tool that you use to enhance your classroom management. So let's learn a little bit more about it. Can you go to the next slide, Inger? Thank you. Okay, so the philosophy of love and logic. Choice and freedom to make mistakes. That's allowed in here. Equal balance of consequences and empathy, replacing punishment whenever possible. The child takes responsibility of his or her actions. Student is required to do more thinking than the adult. This is a really cool concept that we don't often use in the classrooms. So this is a really good one to keep in mind as you begin your new year. Student is required to do, again, more thinking than the adult. And the last one is the child is always left with the feeling that they have some control. And that's important. And we will, can you go to the next slide, please? In this audio recording that you're gonna hear, there's gonna be a little bit about what love and logic is, but also they're gonna provide us with a little example of it. So hopefully it works. Keep your fingers crossed.
Can you see it?
I can see it. It looks like it's trying to upload. Did you also share your audio already, Inger?
Yes.
I promise we practiced this like 3 times. But of course, it never fails. When we need it, it has a hard time.
Let me try.
Not even listening, same old stuff. Love and logic isn't the same old stuff.
Love and logic experiment. Having a rough morning. Student enters class with a negative look in his face, throws himself down into his chair, rolls his eyes towards the ceiling. Teacher, whispering with empathy. Looks like a rough morning. Any way I can help?
I will treat you with respect. Mr. Harrison pointed at a poster titled, "How I Run My Love and Logic Classroom." At the very top it read, "I will treat you with respect so that you will know how to treat me." A Love and Logic classroom is built on mutual respect and dignity. Since great educators know that students must see and experience this, they provide the model. What will have the greatest impact on youth? Is it what we preach or is it what we practice? The word mutual means that great respect and dignity are afforded to students and their teachers. In other words, teachers treat students well and set healthy limits over how they themselves are treated. Like all effective limits, these involve only what falls completely within the control of the adult. Since we cannot control the behavior of others, we set limits by describing what we're committed to do or allow, our rules for ourselves. While each Love and Logic teacher will provide slightly different limits, these limits are always designed to maintain the dignity of everyone involved. Mr.
Okay, there's a lot more to it. This isn't the actual book, which you can purchase. And I purchased the audio book, so I wanted to share a couple of pieces from it. But in terms of this little section that I shared with you, what stood out to you? Is there something he said, something he read that stood out to you? If so, can you put that in the chat for me?
So I'm seeing being empathetic to a child's needs. The teacher's reaction to the student demonstrated empathy.
Hmm?
Mutual respect stood out to me.
Yes, and definitely, I think the part that stood out to me, and when I heard it for the first time, and when I learned about teaching with love and logic, it's really that respect that you have towards the student, and in the many ways that you can show that respect. So indeed, that empathy in which that the teacher responded to the student, the fact that he reached out to say like, there's something going on. Is there something I can do? Can I help you with something? That alone will definitely open up the opportunity for that student to perhaps share what's happening and also feel that the teacher actually cares about what is happening to him or her at that moment. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I have to read one last comment because I really like this. So it says the teacher was reading the student's body language and facial reactions. It popped, the message went away, but yes, that's exactly it. You're having to be almost a detective as a teacher, right? As an educator, we're constantly observing, we're constantly looking at kiddos and observing not only what they're saying to us, but their body language is giving us a ton of information as well. Very good. Okay, so teaching with love and logic has been researched and used across the world because it works. And why it works, really it's a lot of different reasons, but I incorporated 4 different highlights here. It uses humor, hope, and empathy. And I think some of you mentioned that empathy part already, but it also talks a lot about building up the adult-child relationship. So developing that relationship, they emphasize that quite a bit. They also emphasize respect and dignity for both children and adults, and it provides real limits in a loving way, teaches consequences and healthy decision-making as well. One of the most important parts here, though, of love and logic is about building a relationship with your student. As an educator, this is going to pay dividends for you. We will learn about making deposits with your students and how that's done a little later in the presentation. If you do not have a good connection and rapport with the kids, then the trust that you need for learning to take place will hinder the progress for them to reach their full potential. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned before, establishing relationships is important, but maintaining the relationship and knowing how to restore it is just as important. This link that I included here is going to provide you with a step-by-step process of how to do this and really how to emphasize and how to establish each step, how to establish the relationship, how to maintain it, and how to restore it if at any point it's broken. Just because we don't have a lot of time for me to open it up, you can do that on your own. Know that it's there for you to review and to use as well as a handout. Next page, please. So the 3 rules of love and logic: use enforceable limits. Don't tell the kids how to run their lives. Instead, tell them how they're going to run. Instead, tell them how you are going to run yours. So provide choices within limits. Offer only choices that you can deal with. So take time to think about this before these are offered to your students. Also apply consequences with empathy. When consequences are applied with empathy, the child has an opportunity to build a thought process about the mistakes. Next slide, please. So control the time you spend on discipline by building positive relationships with your students, setting enforceable limits through enforceable statements, sharing control, implementing disciplinary interventions that stop undesirable behavior in their infancy, avoiding the need for consequences, and also delaying consequences. When you have a plan ahead of time on how and when to respond to discipline, you reduce the number of disruptions during instruction, and the kids learn that you say and do what you mean, that you follow through. So follow through is important. And the pattern of responding that you establish with your students from the very beginning will let them know whether to believe what you say or not. Next slide, please. Providing choices to your students as you teach your students how to set limits is important, but keep these rules in mind. Be sure to pick choices that you can live with. If a child does not choose, be prepared to choose yourself for them and allow them about 10 seconds to think and process and make a choice. Also, never give a choice unless you are willing to allow the child to experience the consequence of that choice. So, for example, when parents may say, you're going to be grounded forever, clearly that's not going to be the case. So be careful what you say during this time. So think it through before you provide those choices to the student. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of how to provide choices as you are trying to set limits. So would you rather listen without interrupting or choose another place to be right now? That could be one choice I give the students, right? You can see the rest of the choices there. Again, I'm not going to read all of these for you, but you have them there as examples that you can review later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so it is very easy to turn your choices into threats. So definitely be cautious about this, okay? Choose my way or the highway is not the right way to do it. Or knock that off, or I'm going to call your parents. On and on and on. Let's see if we take a few minutes just to think about us and how we like to be spoken to. For example, consider if your principal or supervisor said to you, would you rather do your report today or get fired? That doesn't sound very nice, right? It actually sounds a bit harsh and maybe threatening. So consider something like this when students are not completing their work. You can say to the student, you can either work on this now with all of us, or you can do this during recess. You choose. Again, you allow the 10 seconds for them to decide, and a quick reminder that some students may need a bit more than 10 seconds. So perhaps for them, you may give the choice and let them know, I'll be back to check what you decided on. Walk away and then come back again and check on them. Always, 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 if you say that you're going to come back, always, always do so, because again, this is how you teach the student that you say what you mean. Next slide, please. Okay, so this link is going to provide you with another handout on the power of choice making. Also, it includes how and when to use it, and several ways of how you can utilize choices when teaching or working with kids. That link is also active for you to use at a later time. Next slide, please. Okay, another excellent plan to have is how you will respond when kids try to push your buttons. Because no matter how great you are at managing your class, you will always have at least one student that will test the limits of your plan and system. So be prepared for that as well. These are some great one-liners that Love and Logic recommends that we use to respond to situations in which students are attempting to push your buttons. The worst thing you can do in these instances is to engage in a power struggle with them. So let's look at a few ways that we can answer instead. So you can see on the left says potentially we can say probably so for whatever it is that they're telling us, right? As it fits. Or I respect you too much to argue, or thanks for sharing, or I bet it feels that way. And the last one, I'll listen to you as soon as your voice is as calm as mine. And then you walk away until they are ready. So I would want to practice with you, but we are not, simply because we just have a few more minutes to wrap this up. But you can see here, if the student says, for example, you're mean, that I can probably say, probably so, as a response and be done. I hate this, probably so, and we're done, right? So you can see that some of them may fit better in certain situations. So look through the list and kind of come up with some one-liners that you think you would want to use when students try to push your own buttons. Next slide, please. Okay, use empathy when disciplining. Adults must demonstrate a sincere and empathetic response to a child's misbehavior. Again, kids are so good at identifying when you are being sincere. So it is important that you are sincere when you are delivering this information to the student, and you're empathetic in your response. You become the consultant rather than the rescuer. You also hand over the problem for the child to solve. And the situation is in thinking mode when you do that rather than fighting mode. So when you ask the student to think about this, they're not fighting you on anything at that moment, rather than thinking and processing at that time. The child support decision becomes the bad guy rather than the student or you, the teacher. Next slide, please. So as you look through this empathy one-liners, you can select again here, what will your one-liner be? This must really hurt, or I can see that this is really hard for you. Anything like this will definitely make that connection and show that you are empathetic to their needs at that moment. Next slide, please. Empowering messages after empathy. So what are you going to do about it? This is at the very end, once you have had that conversation, this is the last questions that you want to leave them with. So what are you going to do about it? And have you come up with anything so far? Again, you are putting that power back on the student and you're allowing them to make those choices for themselves instead of us constantly resolving issues for them. We really want our students to begin to do that for themselves. Next slide, please. So you want to let empathy and consequences do the teaching. This is so important though. Don't be sarcastic with the students or condescending. Some kids may understand sarcasm, but other kids may not, and they really may think that you are making fun of them, or they really may think, less than themselves because of the comments that you're making when they're not necessarily understanding sarcasm. So consider that when you're working with kids. Also, keep it short. Sweet and don't be repetitive. Express your empathy before your consequence, and also delaying your consequence gives you time to think. So this pause allows you the time that you may need to think about your consequence and also to keep your cool. Next slide, please. I'm adding here just additional examples and then non-examples of how to respond properly. So for example, rather than saying, you are not going to talk to me that way, we can say, I will be glad to discuss this with you as soon as the arguing stops. Practically, the goal is the same, the delivery is just different. Next slide, please. These are the 5 steps for guiding students to solve their own problems. You can see here we provide a strong dose of empathy with your one-liner that we talked about before. Then you hand the problem back to the student by asking, what are you going to do about it? You offer a menu of suggestions with, would you like to know what some other students have done? And then you ask, how will that work for you after each suggestion, so that the student can, again, take charge of how they're going to resolve that problem or situation. And then at the end, you say, let me know how it's going to work out. And then good luck. You come back and you check and you help them process that on their own. Next slide, please. Now, for kids that have damaged self-esteem, you want to make a deposit. And here you want to think of a student that has low self-esteem or one that is hard to reach. And then in private, you tell them something non-academic that you notice about them. So I noticed that, and then you fill in what it is that you notice about them. Again, non-academic. Let the student respond, if at all. And then end with, I noticed that. This is called making a deposit for when you may need to make a withdrawal or a consequence. So give 1 per week until rapport is established. Making a deposit is going to allow kids to feel special and lets them know that they matter because you are paying attention to them and you're taking an interest in understanding them and catch them being good, as Inger mentioned before. In some cases, it may be either their demeanor that you notice, and making a statement of, I noticed that, allows them to open up if they are ready for perhaps to share what's on their mind at that moment. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another recording that, again, you can listen to on your own. This is a bit longer, so it's about 3 minutes. It has another really good summary of how to utilize all these skills that we just discussed. And they put it into an actual example for you to listen to. Again, you can do that on your own since we don't have that much time, and I've already gone about 4 minutes over time. So we're going to be wrapping up in the next slide. Next slide, please. So some takeaways here for our presentation. Like I said, it was pretty packed, but these are some of the big takeaways that I hope you walk away with. Classroom management is much more than utilizing a token or reinforcement system. Takeaway number 2, you want to develop, teach, post, practice, and reinforce procedures and expectations in order for them to become routines. Takeaway number 3, work hard to develop a positive relationship with your students. And number 4, teach with love and logic. Okay, next slide. These are the resources that we utilize and that you can access online as well. And next slide, please. It's really questions. I know, like I said, that we went 5 minutes over our time, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask those at this time. I know that a question was sent earlier, and I think it was Kristen. I believe, was that you, Kristen? You can unmute yourself if you have that question still.
Yes, that would be great. So in regards to the structure and routines, I was kind of curious with a lot of schools implementing the plexiglass on the desk or the dividers. Does that change how we address classroom setup, or are those distractions? Do you set up the desk differently? I was curious how that affects the environment.
Okay, Ingrid, do you want to take that one on, or do you want me to jump in?
Sure. I'm just thinking, you know, that's a good point, right? Because it definitely is going to affect your setup because of those plexiglass dividers, and making sure that the kids, all the kids can see the board, the Apple TV, if that's what they're using in the classroom, that they all are able to. So it's definitely a huge thing to consider, right? And also your high traffic areas, right? Because we don't want those things getting knocked over or, so yeah, that's a good point.
I think one of the other pieces that I'd like to add to that is that it's definitely good consideration. It's definitely new, right? It's going to be new for all of us as we tackle this whole thing. But as Ingrid presented that list of areas and things to keep in mind as you set up and you structure your classroom, I feel that whether or not there's a plexiglass on the kiddo's desk or on the side or whatever, wherever it may be, that as long as we continue to use that list as a guide for us to kind of organize and set it up, that it should be okay. Now, in terms of the plexiglass, I have to say what I have observed so far this past year, as we began to work directly with kids and as teachers began to work directly with kids, in many cases, the plexiglass almost disappeared. The kids started to interact with one another normally, like the plexiglass didn't even exist. I can tell you, I got a chance to observe an assessment taking place where the plexiglass was pretty close to the examiner and the student as well. And there was a gap underneath the plexiglass. And again, the examiner and the kid just automatically began to use this new adaptation of putting the information or the book or the easel that they had right under that little gap with no hesitation at all. And so I think it's going to take some perhaps getting used to, but again, I think if we continue to follow that list of recommendations that Ingrid discussed earlier, we should be able to still maintain and follow those procedures that or guides that they are given to us. Thank you for the question, Kristen. That was a really good one. Any other questions?
I apologize. I have one more. I'm sorry. I know we're short on time. So I'll be a school psychologist intern next year with WACSEP, and I'm excited. And I had a question about random solicitation. How do we balance kids with special needs that are in the general ed setting, especially those with auditory processing? It might cause anxiety drawing their name on a stick, especially if there is a delay. So what are some suggestions for teachers to kind of keep that in mind?
I think you're going to really tailor it to the needs of your classroom, right? So if that would be a procedure that would increase a lot of anxiety for kids for different reasons, that wouldn't be something that would be most effective, right? you want to keep that in mind. That's a really good point. For some kids, you don't want to put them on the spot like that. It's not going to work. It's actually going to do the reverse, do the opposite, and cause just another disruption that we don't want to do. So again, it's being creative. It's an option that you can use. And this is more for kids that have the answer, may be shy to respond, and you're trying to encourage them to participate more. This is a good way to do that because you know that they have the answer. This is also a good thing to use when you have certain students that answer all the time, right? Like they always have the answer, they're always raising their hand, and then other kids don't have the opportunity to respond. So yeah, you're definitely going to adapt it based on your class, and it might not be a good strategy in certain situations, and especially in some of your special day class classrooms.
And I think Inger has it right on in terms of the adaptation, that even though, I mean, these are suggestions, doesn't mean that you're going to have to use every single one of the things we discussed here today. And it may or may not work for your class as a whole. If you think that this is going to impact the majority of your kids, then this may not be the right strategy to utilize. But you can also, if you know that it's just one student, you can also actually prepare the student ahead of time. So you may have that conversation with them ahead of time where you say, I'm going to ask you this question. Okay, how are you going to answer this? So you practice with them ahead of time. And even though it may not be random, you kind of sort of still make it look like it's random. When you pick out his or her name, you know that they're going to be ready to respond at that time. So there's certain adaptations that you can make. But in any case, thank you for your question. I know we are obviously gone above our time limit here. Now it's 11:40. So we are going to end our presentation at this time. Thank you for attending. And for those of you guys that are going to be listening to this after our live presentation, thank you for taking the time to look this up and to listen and for preparing for your students as they begin the new year. And that's it for me. Thank you.
One last question, Vera. Somebody asked if there's going to be a link, or they're going to be presented with a link with the slides.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and email all of you that attended. I'm going to go ahead and email that link to you guys today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.